Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Keith Whittier. I am joined today by my friend James Dunn. We are doing a UFC 254 post-fight analysis. And of course, you know it's a big deal when we get together to talk about it because we don't do this every week. We're really excited about the fights today. So many major things happened tonight that we want to talk about, or this afternoon, I should say, that we want to talk about tonight. First and foremost, James, do you think that UFC 254 lived up to the hype?
No question, Keith. We talked about it a lot leading up to this fight. And, regardless of which way it was going to go tonight, I think it was going to be exciting. But I don't think that we ever discussed the possibility that Khabib would, run over Justin and immediately move to a retirement position. I think that surprised the whole world of MMA, and definitely everyone in my house who was watching the fight was surprised. How about you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was not what we were expecting. Now, just to really catch people up, Khabib Nurmagomedov, the undisputed lightweight champion, came into the fight at 28-0, which is absolutely unheard of. He was taking on the interim champion Justin Gaethje, who won that interim belt back in May when, due to the coronavirus, Khabib was unable to compete due to travel restrictions. And Justin Gaethje took on Tony Ferguson in a fight that everybody expected Tony Ferguson was going to win, everybody except for Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje pulled off the win that night, claiming the interim championship, which set up a date tonight for the unification of these two titles. Now, since that time, unfortunately, Khabib lost his father due to complications from corona, and him and his father had an extremely deep, close relationship. And after Khabib won tonight, he said that his mother didn't even want him to fight, but he said it's something that he felt he needed to do. And he said there's no way he's going to continue doing it without his father. And he announced that it would be his final fight. And per what we've seen in a lot of fights previously, he took off the gloves, left them in the middle of the octagon, and called it a career. So I feel this was such a monumental occasion because I feel that not only did he win, but I feel that the MMA community, in a sense, loses because we're not going to see probably the greatest to ever do it anymore. What do you think?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I think I had two emotions. One was I was extremely happy for Khabib and the journey that he's taken. I think you covered it well there with his dad. Unfortunately, getting the coronavirus and eventually losing his life to it. I think that man particularly put in so much time and effort into all the folks in Dagestan and in the camp there. And you see, there's 7 or 8 UFC fighters now that we have and are amazing fighters with great values. And I think Khabib was the head of that team. And ultimately, the other piece to it you alluded to is also a little bit of sadness, right? Because the story leading up to this fight, as we talked about all week, was maybe Khabib will fight George St. Pierre after this fight. And ultimately, we were also discussing if Gaethje actually pulled off the miracle and beat Khabib, well, maybe he'd fight Conor McGregor. So for this to happen, I think like I said, it's one. The whole community's happy for Khabib. You saw Dana White after the fight. Generally, when someone's leaving in a championship position, Dana in the future or in the past, sorry, hasn't been too happy. You just have to look back to George St. Pierre to see that. And in this one, I think he acknowledged first of all, Khabib's extreme momentum and everything he's put into this sport. And also, he said that he believed him and that we wouldn't see him again. So ultimately, super surprising. But like I said, it's a mix of emotions for most of us UFC fans because ultimately we wanted to see Khabib again. But ultimately, I think you can have it be reasonable that this is the end of his career.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was an interesting fight. I'll take a moment and talk about the fight. It came in
Mhm.
and the commentary was that Khabib was going to try to take him down because Khabib is a high level wrestler, high level grappler, and Gaethje is a high level striker. Well, in the first round, it wasn't until the end of the round that Khabib really went for a takedown. It's as if he wanted to prove, James, that he was able to strike with Gaethje. What did you think? Did you see it that way?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's the story of this fight. How he looked on the feet, how he walked him down. I think, if we discussed this before, we said that Khabib was going to march straight into Justin Gaethje and throw hands and not take a takedown until the later in the round, you would assume that he might eat a few punches and essentially lose that battle on the feet. And it was the exact opposite. It looked like Gaethje was a fish out of water the whole fight, and he couldn't actually put his feet down and throw any sort of punch at all or any effective ones. He did land a few, but none of really noteworthy strength that would have rocked Khabib or anything like that. And ultimately, I thought it was super aggressive. When he ended up taking him down, he was immediately, I think, going for the armbar in the first round, right? And Gaethje essentially only survived because the round was over. And then once he decided he was going to dive and go for that triangle, it was unbelievable how fast that was cinched in and how quickly he actually put him to sleep. I thought the ref was a little bit late. I think you saw Gaethje tap at least 5 or 6 times before he actually went to sleep. So you hate to see that, but I think the story of this fight was Khabib Nurmagomedov took him out on the feet.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing because, you know, as we lead up to these fights, there's a lot of hype. There's tons of interviews. There's tons of content to consume on YouTube with, you know, the fighters being interviewed, the coaches being interviewed, and all of that. And that all leads into us wanting to see the fight. But once the fight started, it was very clear that Gaethje was very intimidated by his opponent. There was a lot of respect there, but he was very intimidated. Mm-hmm. And for the most part, he was like running away from Khabib. Can you remember the last time you saw Justin Gaethje running from an opponent the way he did tonight?
Never. But you know what? The way he looked, I almost didn't blame him. It was like I said, he never could actually put his feet down. He was just always taking a back step. And ultimately, I think, you know, to look at Khabib where he started in this sport, he hardly used to throw a punch. So to see him go in there and essentially outstrike one of the most dangerous, violent strikers we've ever seen was amazing. And one of the stories I was just reading before we started discussing this was he actually has a broken foot in a couple places. And I think there's 2 toes and then, you know, an actual fracture on his foot that he has x-rays of. So with that being said, to outstrike him and not actually just take him down right away is ultimately super impressive.
No, absolutely. And, you know, I think one of the things is that when we look at fighters who many fighters retire, and it happens. And I don't think for me, it's as much as the fact that he's an undefeated fighter retiring. Of course, that's a big storyline, but he is a different type of fighter than what we're used to seeing in the UFC. We are used to seeing people, whether you like them or not, like the Chael Sonnens, the Conor McGregors, the Israel Adesanyas, who do a lot of trash talking in that. And Khabib is a very humble person. From what I understand, he still lives at home with his parents. I think he's making something like 20 million per fight or so. His popularity is huge worldwide. He's extremely popular. Dana White listed off all these numbers about YouTube views and the most popular player in the video game and all of that. He had a motorcade lead him from the hotel to the arena tonight. And one of the things that's just so inspiring about him is the fact that there's no trash talking, with the exception of the McGregor situation, which admittedly got out of hand. Even after winning tonight, he showed nothing but respect to Justin. After he beat Dustin Poirier last September, he said, hey, you know what? I want to help Justin out with his charities and do what I can to help him. I mean, he's a very honorable person, and that's something that we're not used to seeing in this sport. And I get that there's going to be that bravado, and I get that sometimes we want to see that trash talk, and there's those funny one-liners that get us to buy in. But he did it not based on his mouth and based on, you know, talking trash, but just based on his performance. Because, you know, at any weight class, you'd be hard pressed to find a fighter that had been as dominant as he was.
Absolutely. Yeah. When you think about his career now, 29-0, the only round he ever lost was that 3rd round to Conor McGregor. And if you look at that, that's one of those, you know, flip a coin rounds where he really didn't lose much of the rounds. It was basically because of the scoring system, they have to pick a winner. So an absolutely impeccable career. You know, he dominated so many folks. And, you know, when he first kind of really started dominating, and he was yelling at Dana White while he was beating people up and really just imposing his will whenever he wanted to. And though, to your point as well, just by leading the values that he has, and being, you know, they're part of a great team. They're a family team. You know, he's had so many storybook moments in this sport. I think we're all going to miss him for sure. But I think, like I said earlier, we can all appreciate the position that he's in. And, you know, I wish him nothing but the best in the future.
Yeah, and I join that sentiment as well. I know that there was a lot of talk that if he had won this fight, that the next thing in line would have been a potential fight with George St. Pierre. 2 interesting things about that. The first thing is, I think it says a lot that you need to bring in, and all due respect to George St. Pierre, but what does it say about the lightweight division when you have to bring in somebody who's been retired for several years to compete against Khabib because he's pretty much cleaned out the division? or the talk of maybe he needs to go to 170 pounds and take on Kamaru Usman, and maybe that was an option. So I think that says a lot about his dominance. But I loved that there was a piece that was on ESPN where George St. Pierre came out and he said, hey, listen, I can't, I appreciate the guy's mourning. And he's like, fully congratulate him. He's going out on top. George St. Pierre is not looking for that fight. And I think there's a lot of mutual respect between the two of them. And again, George St. Pierre was one of these people who wasn't into the trash talking, just into the performance. So I'm very fortunate that we've gotten to enjoy two such phenomenal fighters and classy fighters in this era. And not to say that the other guys who are in the UFC or guys and gals in the UFC aren't fantastic, but I just think that Khabib and GSP are like on a really on another level of
Absolutely
of class. So when we look at the lightweight division now, so what do you think should be next? Of course, we've got the fight in January with Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor. Does that, in your opinion, automatically become a title fight? Because I know there's talk in terms of what do you do with Gaethje? What do you do with Michael Chandler, who they recently signed from Bellator? Tony Ferguson still in the mix. So if we put on our matchmaker hats right now, James, as we like to do from time to time, what do you think they should be doing with the lightweight championship?
I think before Dana and Connor started, publicly having a beef, this last few months, I think Dana would have quickly made McGregor Poirier the title fight. But I was watching the post fight just a few minutes ago, and when he was asked the question, he quickly said, I'm not talking about it right now. So ultimately, I think that one could be the title fight. It's very, very tough, though. We're in a weird position where we're starting to put the people who just lost to Khabib in the fight for the title again. And it always seems kind of weird that way, I like the idea of Michael Chandler being in the mix at this division. I like the idea of Gaethje still being in the mix, Tony Ferguson, if you will. But honestly, if I could do anything, I would probably suggest they do something like we've seen in Bellator, where they do a tournament, for example, and you chuck the top 8 people in there and you let them fight it out for it. Generally, the UFC hasn't done that yet, but that would be a cool thing to see. But I think you've got to look at either McGregor, Poirier, Ferguson, or Gaethje. They're the top 5 right now, and that would only be the fair thing to do.
Yeah, considering that one of the things that and I'm not really sure why he was saying this, considering he knew what he was going to do, but maybe he was just trying to show some respect to Dustin Poirier. But Khabib was saying that if you wanted to fight me, you had to go through Poirier because he had that much respect for Dustin Poirier. So that being said, I like your idea of a tournament, but that holds up the title for a year pretty much. So do you see them potentially doing like changing course and doing maybe even a Poirier Chandler? Well, I can't see them doing Poirier Chandler, but a Poirier McGregor, does that become for the title? Because your idea is a great one. I just don't know if they would hold up the title for a year, because for us to go through a tournament of like 8 fighters, even 4 fighters, considering a lot of these guys only fight twice a year, we're going to be waiting a while.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. The wait would absolutely be terrible, but I think if there's one person that you put the title on the shelf for a year and let it properly work itself out, Khabib is the person we would do that for. Ultimately, I think, Gaethje has got himself to a spot where, other than tonight's fight, he's basically rolled through everyone else except for Poirier, right? When actually he lost to Poirier back then. So if I had a crystal ball, I'm thinking it's either McGregor Poirier or McGregor Gaethje or Gaethje Poirier. I think they're all in the mix there, and all those are great matches for us. I think they've ultimately lost a little bit of luster with Khabib already basically taking them all out. But I think that's the thing we'll see next.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see how that all plays out. And we'll definitely be paying attention to that. Let's shift gears to the co-main, if that's okay with you, and talk about the fight between Robert Whittaker, who was ranked number 1, against Jared Cannonier, who was ranked number 2. Now, of course, Robert Whittaker lost the title to Israel Adesanya, came back, had a very good performance against Darren Till. Meanwhile, Cannonier hadn't fought for, I believe, the last 13 months. And they came in a fight where Cannonier was the slight favorite in this fight. And it was interesting because although the decision was 2 rounds to 1, I honestly thought that Robert Whittaker, I'm not a judge, but I thought he'd won all 3 rounds. I'll have to go back and rewatch the fight, but I think we probably might have seen the best Robert Whittaker we've seen in the last while. What do you think when you saw the fight?
I would totally agree. I thought it was going to be a lot more competitive between the two. Just based on Cannonier's last couple of fights, he seemed like he's been a wrecking machine, right? So ultimately, this was also his first test at that top level. And I think when I think about top level at middleweight, I think Robert Whittaker, right? Even though he lost to Adesanya, really that's the only time we've seen him falter. And he's gone through some devastating injuries behind the scenes as well. And I know he's had a family and things like that recently, and hasn't maybe had MMA on the first on his list when he was fighting Adesanya. But I would totally agree. I thought he won all 3 rounds. I thought he looked fantastic. I thought he looked fast. I thought he looked sharp. I thought his defense looked on point. I was messaging one of my friends earlier today when they thought that Cannonier was just going to run right over him. I said, look, Robert Whittaker, aka Bobby Knuckles, is serious business. And I thought in the embedded, he looked insanely fast and quick. And I think ultimately he was able to get to the punch much quicker than Cannonier tonight. And, I think that rematch with Adesanya is a good one. I think, if you look back to the fight, he seemed like he wasn't himself in the fight. He was leaping in really, really weird. And tonight he just did it in a way more, better fashion. He was using his head a little bit more, and he wasn't just rushing in, without thinking about it. And I think everything he did tonight was very measured, and you could see he's worked on that. And super impressed with Robert.
It's interesting. We don't like getting into MMA math, which is okay. This guy beat that guy, so therefore this guy should be able to beat that guy. But I do like going back and taking a look at their resume per se, their fight resume, and who they've beaten. And when you look at Cannonier's list of who he's beaten, in my opinion, not as impressive as what Whittaker has done. And I think one of the biggest names on the win list for Cannonier that stands out is Anderson Silva. But with all due respect, he didn't fight an Anderson Silva in his prime. He fought a 40-plus-year-old Anderson Silva, and he got him. He took him out by going after with a leg kick. And with all due respect to Anderson Silva, I mean, he's the guy fighting. I'm the guy on my couch eating wings. I'm just saying. I mean, I'm surprised that more people haven't gone after his legs because he's a very thin guy for middleweight. But then you look at Robert Whittaker, and he's got like two victories over Romero. And I think like Romero's probably one of the scariest guys in there. So I think a lot of people might have discounted Whittaker, and I think tonight was an opportunity for him to remind them of just how good he is.
Yeah, I would agree. It was cool to see him after the fight. He basically said, the last couple of years, he's always had fights booked when he was having children, and that really kind of got to his head a little bit. I alluded to that earlier, but this time he said, I'm taking off till Christmas. I'm going to have my child, and then I'm going to come back and look for a fight. So ultimately, I thought he was going to come back and, demand Adesanya right away, but it looks like Adesanya is going to have some time if there's anyone else there for him. But if I were him, I would wait for Robert and do something, in New Zealand or Australia where they're absolutely huge.
Yeah. So here's the interesting thing. There are a lot of MMA journalists and people that we listen to that always say it's great after you finish your fight to call out the next fight and kind of keep that momentum going. Now, the same way that I feel again that Justin Gaethje was very intimidated by Khabib. If you go back and you look at that first fight between Whittaker and Adesanya, it was very clear to me that Whittaker was very intimidated by Adesanya. I think he was in that fight and he looked very fearful. He looked very scared. So he had the opportunity to come and call for the champion. Dana White said, hey, the fight with Whittaker makes sense. I think that's the fight to do. And I appreciate and I respect the fact that he wants to spend time and be there for the birth of his child. Nothing should be more important to him. But he seemed very, very hesitant about wanting to fight Adesanya again, to the point where he kind of backpedaled in an interview and said, "Oh, I'm not saying I don't want to fight him, but we'll see. It doesn't have to be next." So here's the thing: as a consumer of this product, and as somebody who's like going to order and put money down for the pay-per-view, my concern is that if the guy who's fighting doesn't really want to be there, why do I want to watch it? I think the best thing right now for Adesanya is either to go up to 205 to challenge Jan Blachowicz and become a champ, which is a big thing in the industry right now, being a champ, or go for that big money fight with John Jones. Because if you're going up against a guy in Robert Whittaker who is clearly intimidated by you and clearly doesn't really want to fight you, regardless of like a time frame sometime in the new year, that's not going to be exciting for fans, because we've seen that before. And I don't want to see scared Robert Whittaker again. I want to see the Robert Whittaker from tonight. But the Robert Whittaker from tonight wasn't the same Robert Whittaker in that post-fight press conference when he was asked about Adesanya, because that guy completely changed. At least that's what I saw. What did you see?
Yeah, you know what I can see. I think that's a good point. But the thing I think that's, you know, hard as a human to look at is you can see what these fighters go through. And, you know, our day jobs, for example, when we put on our headset or you talk to a customer, you know, that's as, you know, as stressful as about, you know, 1% of what these people would feel, knowing that they've got to go into a cage and look like put their brain health in danger. I don't have a family yet, but I know that if I was going to have one, I would probably want to have my full focus towards it. But I think it's a good point. As a consumer, it leaves us wondering, does Whittaker actually really want that fight? And will he look, you know, timid again? Ultimately, though, I think you brought up a really great point for Adesanya is he's had the beef with John Jones now, you know, on Twitter, everywhere you look at, they're going after each other. And, you know, it's got even really ugly where, you know, they're, you know, Adesanya actually mentioned John Jones' mother, who had passed a year or two ago. I think that's the fight to make. I think when there's legitimate bad blood that goes that deep, I think that's what would sell the best. And I legitimately think that Adesanya is the person to give John Jones that trouble in the octagon. And at the same time, I think Jones is the same person to give Adesanya some trouble in the octagon. So that's one that I would really, really love to see skill-wise, but also just beef-wise as well. I think it's as real as it gets, as I like to say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me ask you this. And again, we know that there's a couple of pay-per-views that are coming up in November and December. And with all due respect, there isn't anything I think that's going to be as exciting for myself. I don't want to speak for you, but for myself is what we saw today. To tell you two things, you know, since it's just us. The first thing is that my heart rate, according to my Apple Watch, is usually around 65 or so. At least that's what it was today. When that Khabib Gaethje fight was in full swing, it jumped to 135. So maybe watching Khabib fights isn't good for my health because I was so excited. I don't know. It's like I was running a marathon while it was happening. I did not have 1 cent on this fight. I was just so excited to see it. It was this whole week I've been just doing a little countdown, looking forward to this. And then the other thing, which I knew I was emotionally invested, was when he was giving his farewell speech, talking about his dad. You know, it might have gotten dusty in here. Let's just say that, as I felt something on my cheek. Must have been because the room was dusty. I don't know. Anyway, all of that being said, when we look ahead to 2021, aside, because I know you're going to say McGregor and Poirier, aside from that, what is one fight in 2021 that you would love to see the UFC put on, or one fight that they're going to put on that you're really looking forward to?
I think it's the heavyweights. I think you've got Francis Ngannou, who's been waiting a long time to face Stipe Miocic again. I've heard recently that Stipe is going to be out till about March with some sort of injury. But really, that's the fight I would love to see. Two huge guys going at it, both very skilled. Francis always very scary to watch. You know, anything can happen with him. And I think the firefighter, Stipe Miocic, always fun to watch him, especially considering he just beat Daniel Cormier again. Ultimately, that's, other than McGregor, if you won't let me say that, that would be the fight I'd like to see.
Okay. Because I only took that one off because I knew that was going to be your number one.
You're true.
Yeah. So for myself, the fight that I want to see, and we need a couple of fights before we get to it, is Kamaru Usman and Colby Covington 2. Of course, Kamaru Usman is supposed to fight Gilbert Burns. There's talk of Colby Covington fighting Jorge Masvidal, assuming they both win those respective fights. I would love to see the rematch. The reason being is that Colby Covington does a great job of getting under most people's skin, but not Kamaru Usman. In the last post fight, they were going back and forth, and you could see that Colby Covington was getting more and more angry and enraged, and Usman couldn't be more calm. And I would love to see that play out a second time, because I think it was one of the best fights that year when it took place. When was that? Back in 2019, I think, not too long ago. So that's the fight
Totally agree.
that I'd love to see, which would probably happen about a year from now if everything lines up.
Let's
Again,
hope.
sorry, go ahead. Yeah, let's hope. Let's
I
definitely
said, let's hope.
That's definitely hope. And I hope we get to do this again soon, because I absolutely love chatting MMA with you, and it's always a pleasure to have you on. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
Likewise, my friend.
He is James Dunn. I am Keith Whittaker. Thank you so much from James and I for taking the time to check this out. We love chatting about UFC, and as I've said before, every now and then I'll say, let's throw a camera on this and put it out there. This is a pleasure for us to come and talk to you about, and thank you so much for taking the time. And everybody stay safe, and we'll see you next time.